Our next speaker is Henry Short, Projects Officer, Fish for Tees Rivers Trust. The floor is yours, Henry.
Hey everyone, and thanks for having me. So I'm going to be talking today about our Oyster Restoration project. So I've been working with the Tees Rivers Trust now for a little over a year, doing our estuary project, so looking at oysters and seagrass restoration. Today I'll focus on the oysters and what we've been doing in the estuary around the Tees River. So first, what are oysters? So they're a marine bivalve, so it means two halves connected together by a hinge. So they live around coastal waters and estuaries. They're filter feeders, so that means they take in water, filter out the algae they feed and any other pollutants, and then sequester it into the seafloor. And they like growing on each other, which is what gregarious means. They're broadcast spawners, so this means the males will just release their sperm into the sea. The females will take this up, develop eggs within their shell, and then just release millions of larvae into the ocean and just hope some survive. And then these larvae will float around, find a suitable place to settle. Previously we had oysters everywhere. You've heard already today that 98% figure and 100% figure for the estuary. So this map just shows exactly where the oyster reefs used to be around the UK. So they used to be really widespread. And it's hard to tell on the map, but there is a line all across the northeast that used to be completely covered in native oyster reefs. So the biggest issue we had and where they all went was overfishing. They used to be the food of the poor. They were the cheapest alternative to other meats and stews. In London alone, 700 million oysters were eaten in 1 year. And there used to be oyster festivals for the first harvest because they were that important to the communities. A more local issue is land reclamation. So this map on the left shows what the Tees estuary used to look like, which is obviously, if anyone's been down there, it's very different now. And round seal sands and brand sands is where we know there used to be thriving oyster fisheries, but unfortunately now it's been channelized in industry. They have all been lost. So why do we want to restore them? Apart from they were always here and it would be nice to bring them back, they're amazing cleaners of the ocean. So a single oyster can filter 200 litres of water a day, so that's nearly a bathtub. So not only does this take out particulates floating in the water and algae, but it also can sequester nutrients into the seafloor. Here's an infographic of all the other things oysters can do. I don't have time to go through all of them in this format, but big ones is providing habitats for things like lobsters, crabs, juvenile fish, which can support local fisheries. They can reduce wave energy, protect coastal communities. And a lot of the reasons that they do all this amazing stuff is because they form reefs. So like I said, they're gregarious, they like to grow on each other, which means they make these really cool 3D structures with loads of nooks and crannies for animals to hide in. So again, like I said, crabs, lobsters, juvenile fish, they're great for improving biodiversity in the area as well as cleaning. So now we know it's a great idea to restore them. How do we go about doing it? Going back to our life cycle, the first thing we need to have a healthy oyster population is reproductive adults. So we need a source of adults in the estuary to provide that larvae that can keep the cycle going. So our first step is get adults in the estuary. So we use these nurseries. So it's a protective outer cage, and then the cage on the inside has individual compartments for adult oysters. So these will hold the oysters, and a single female oyster can produce 20 million larvae a year. So by having these, you can pump out millions of larvae into the estuary each year, trying to boost the population. So that's exactly what we have in Hartlepool Marina. These are photos of our cages. So we have 20 cages holding over 600 oysters. Every year that will pump millions of larvae into the estuary, and hopefully they'll find a place to settle, but probably need a helping hand because they like hard substrate. So every year we've been monitoring with our lovely volunteers. So they come down, we've been checking survival rates, we've been looking at biodiversity increases in the cages, looking at the environmental factors, and as you can see by the face of some of our volunteers, it can get mucky work. But it's been going really well. So they went in September last year. Since then, we've had over 95% survival of our oysters in the nurseries. And we've had actually now over 30, because we've just done another monitoring of different species living in the cages, including big eels, various fish species, nudibranchs, shrimps, crabs. So now we've got these nurseries. The next step in the life cycle is where do the larvae go? So we need to give them a suitable substrate to grow on. So they have a planktonic larvae, so it will float through the ocean, and then they'll find a suitable place to settle. And their preferred settlement ground is generally anything hard, but preferably other oyster shells or scallop shells. So we're looking for funding at the moment to do seabed restoration. So this will be putting that hard substrate onto the seafloor, so there is a place for the larvae to settle. So it will involve putting large amounts of sand or gravel down, and then topping this with mix of shell or gravel known as culch, which will provide this habitat that the juveniles need. And then the next step, or to improve this process, we're building spatting ponds. So instead of having your nursery in one area and your reef in another area and hoping they find each other, we're putting the whole life cycle in a big pond, basically. So we'll cover the bottom of our pond with shell, hang adult oysters into the top of the nursery. So this is the actual picture of it. And then hopefully we can get spat, which is what a juvenile oyster growing on substrate is called. We'll get that growing on the shells, and we can then deploy those into the sea with live oysters at our facility, which we've called the Tees Estuary Restoration Initiative, or TERI for short. So yeah, in summary, I think oysters are great. They can improve water quality, increase biodiversity, amongst many other things. But to get them back into the Tees Estuary, we need adult oysters to produce larvae, somewhere for them to settle. And hopefully with our spatting ponds, we can bring that together and keep it all going. So this funding, this project was funded by the Green Recovery Challenge Fund. So a massive thank you to them for making this all possible, and a massive thank you to Hartlepool Marina, which is where our oyster nurseries currently are at the moment. And a thanks to everyone for listening, and to the organisers for having me. Cheers.